Ernest Becker, in his book The Denial of Death, illustrated two basic fears which stir the person's behavior all throughout his life. First being the fear of this very existence, a realm of absurdity, full of uncertainty, pain and suffering, engenders somewhat a default level of stress. Second is the fear of death, an instinctual sense, an inborn thought that the end of it all is to vanish utterly one day. These two basic fears make existence rather strenuous to bear, a living hell despite the occasional bouts of pleasure. This burden forces the individual to find a plausible reason as to why they should continue living, a meaning. For hundreds of years, the Christian doctrine had provided people with such a meaning. That is, no matter how much suffering they are to endure, an eternal soothing awaits after death. Heaven. Since the rise of the Roman Empire, man was not bothered by this perplexing inquiry. The meaning of life and the path one is to choose were served by the church that had established itself back then as the sole government and at once educator. So, people were uninterested in such questions, for questioning the church would portray them as heretics, and partly for the answers about life which they were handed were quite convincing. Convincing because the church made these answers seem otherworldly, coming from high above, and thus appear objective and true. Nietzsche thought that people always search for an objective meaning, one that is not man-made, bias-resistant, existing outside the mind. By infusing this life with a meaning intertwined to an unreachable dimension, Christianity succeeded in creating a firm rationale which kept atheism and skepticism at bay for generations. This vision of an afterlife is a strong narrative, imbues people with hope for a better future in heaven compared to their shitty earthly existence, no offense, makes it more endurable as we always have something unearthly and thus exciting to look forward to. That said, Nietzsche was remarkable in that he was one of the first to have predicted the fall of Christianity. In the beginning of the scientific revolution of the 16th century, up to the Age of Enlightenment, Nietzsche was correct in his calculation that science would replace religion. These periods were marked by pervasiveness of philosophical thought, primarily criticism of the sovereign Christian dogmas, and the emphasis on experiment as a measure of truth, quite the opposite of what religion advocates. Christianity for so long had presented itself as the provider of an objective truth about this life and its meaning. Nietzsche noted that philosophy exposed Christianity as not a truth in itself, but an interpretation of the truth, a mere subjective opinion on actuality, on reality. The problem is not this transition from religion to science, but in the outcomes thereof. Nietzsche thought that however great discoveries it had done and has yet to do to clarify reality and raise the intellect, science and a complete and utter entrenchment in a scientific interpretation of existence would deprive life of all meaning. Plant the seed of philosophical questioning, people get skeptical about the practicality of religion, get shaken, shocked, disown their beliefs, get suspicious about the meaning of life itself since it was provided by religion, drop that. Now we're left with a populace that is disoriented, lacking meaning again, which make it difficult to choose to continue living or to be active in life. With science we're back at square one, similar to where religion had never existed. Nietzsche had predicted this inevitable existential crisis with precision. He says, "This thought is intended for the ears and consciences of our mechanists who nowadays like to pass as philosophers and insist that the mechanics is the doctrine of the first and last laws on which all existence must be based as on the ground floor. But an essentially mechanical world would be an essentially meaningless world." From here it is safe to lay down our many definitions of the term. Nihilism, thus a psychological state in which the person had come to realize that his most cherished beliefs were not as he had long conceived to be true. It is the biggest existential shock there is. It starts with the questioning of one's religious convictions, but it is more than just philosophical questioning. Nihilism is a destructive force, violently raiding upon one's beliefs. On the verge of getting suspicious about all what religion preaches, the person then becomes distrustful of all beliefs, all value systems, all meanings, concepts, and morals. Nihilism, then, is the negation of this earthly reality as fake on the premise that everything it contains is opinion, rather subjective, man-made, and thus valueless. What were the advantages of the Christian moral hypothesis? It granted man an absolute value, as opposed to his smallness and accidental occurrence in the flux of becoming and passing away. It served the advocates of God insofar as it conceded to the world, in spite of suffering and evil, the character of perfection, including freedom. Evil appeared full of meaning. It posited man had a knowledge of absolute values and thus adequate knowledge precisely regarding what is most important. It prevented man from despising himself as man, from taking sides against life, from despairing of knowledge. It was a means of preservation. In sum, morality was the great antidote against practical and theoretical nihilism. The populace awakened from the slumber of morality to the void of critical thought, a not so pleasant transition as they're now faced with another dilemma, that of meaninglessness. The end of the moral interpretation of the world, which no longer has any sanction after it has tried to escape into some beyond, leads to nihilism. The moral interpretation of life bestowed by Christianity as the seed of truth is the same seed which brought about its demolition. And then one stands an empty shell, as our hitherto provider of beliefs was also our provider of meaning. Now we discover in ourselves needs implanted by centuries of moral interpretation, needs that now appear to us as needs for untruth. On the other hand, the value for which we endure life seems to hinge on these needs. Since nihilism is the natural outcome of the distancing from the moral interpretation of life, Nietzsche implies that these two extremes overlap in a sense that one end inevitably leads to the other. Christianity is nihilism in some sense. As he noted, insofar as we believe in morality, we pass sentence on existence. There is no value in value itself, there is no meaning in meaning. If life is meaningless, then obviously there is no sense in action or desire. What does nihilism mean? That the highest values devaluate themselves. Man, upon disowning morality, enters a state in which everything is permitted, but yet in which everything is perceived as valueless. Rejecting idealism results in nihilism. He now sees this world unable to assert itself as true. Once he became mistrustful of the moral ideal, he turns against all interpretations and ideals. He concludes that humans have no right to simplify existence by creating a metaphysical narrative, i.e. heaven, a fake, high above positioned world subjectively created merely to make this earthly, chaotic reality feel more durable, to comfort themselves, so to say. Radical nihilism is the conviction of an absolute unattainability of existence when it comes to the highest values one recognizes, plus the realization that we lack the least right to posit a beyond or an in itself of things that might be divine or moral incarnate. Since no worldview can satiate the nihilist's need for objectivity, he denies the value in this existence, and comes to deduce that a real world, including the highest values such as truth, morality, cannot exist except in the realm of thoughts and in the subjective confines of the human mind. Thus, to him, this world is fake, and that a true world is non-existent. A nihilist is a man who judges of the world as it is, that it ought not to be, and of the world as it ought to be, that it does not exist. You may have noticed that as we've gone further into the video, I've been providing more than one meaning to the term nihilism, each of which gave more clarity to the former. The reason is Nietzsche's style of writing, especially in The Will to Power. He offers many definitions to nihilism. His style is anti-systematic, ambiguous, and because of this, his views are subject to many interpretations. With some research and adding in my personal understanding, I compiled this video for you guys. In upcoming sequels, we'll be looking at another cause aside from loss in religious faith, which can also trigger nihilism. Thanks for watching.